Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, drone warfare has penetrated deep into the metropolitan areas of Russia and Ukraine in recent weeks. Soon will anywhere be safe? A new report from the Palestinian Feminist Collective sheds light on the systematized sexual abuse of Palestinian detainees. Morgan McSweeney has admitted that Labour failed to prepare for being in government, and Keir Starmer appears to be trying to pinkwash his legacy. I'm Helena, aka NJMTG, and I'm joined tonight by Stephen Methven. Dream Team back in action.
Dream Team forever, Helena, that's what I say. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Yeah, not bad. It's getting toasty in this studio again, so we're all keeping an eye on the thermometer to make sure that it doesn't all fall apart. But I think we'll be okay.
It does seem to be like that the weather is not as crazy as it was last week, although apparently there is another heat dome coming.
I know, the dreaded heat domes. A terrifying new climatological feature that I hadn't heard about until like 3 weeks ago.
And now we've got two all at the same time. You wait ages for one heat dome and then you immediately get two.
Yeah.
Hey-ho, hey-ho. A barrage of Russian drones and missiles rained down on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv for a blistering 12-hour stint last night, killing at least 20 and injuring scores more. Across the cities, fires raged as residential buildings crumbled under relentless bombardment. Just short of 500 drones and more than 70 missiles were launched toward the capital from different directions. That's according to Ukraine's Air Force. Most were intercepted, but 33 projectiles successfully hit their targets. Many civilians sought shelter in metro stations. Search and rescue teams have been working against the clock to free those feared trapped beneath the rubble of their homes after entire blocks of flats were demolished. Russia insists the strikes were in retaliation to Ukraine ramping up drone attacks in Russia. Ukraine has pivoted in its approach in recent weeks, targeting infrastructure in Russian-occupied Crimea, a favourite holiday spot among Russian tourists. Ukraine has also targeted oil refineries lately, triggering severe fuel shortages across the country, and prompting concern and anxiety from Russian citizens who have been contending with queues at petrol stations and pumps routinely running dry. So, Russia's latest assault on Kyiv has been deadly, but not totally unexpected. Posting on Twitter during a visit to Dublin on Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned the nation that a strike could be imminent, saying this: "Today, I ask our people in Ukraine to be especially careful. Stay safe and protect your families and children. Be sure to take shelter and pay attention to air raid alerts in Ukraine. We know that Putin has been preparing a massive strike against Ukraine for some time. That is exactly the threat we are facing tonight." Since the attack, Zelensky has commended Kyiv's first responders. He also reiterated the value of moving forward with the implementation of anti-ballistic missile program agreements, much like the one Ukraine signed with Germany back in June, that's designed to forge strong industrial cooperation that's focusing on the development of advanced interceptor missiles. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, who is on a working visit to Japan, said this in a post on Twitter on Thursday. "In this war, there is an aggressor and a country defending itself under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Russia has no right to make any strikes against Ukraine, while Ukraine has every right to respond, defend from an aggressor, and strike any legitimate military targets in Russia. Do not equate an aggressor and a country defending from aggression. Do not justify atrocities that cannot be justified." Britain's Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said this about the attacks. Russia has again chosen escalation over peace with this deplorable onslaught on Kyiv, including dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones killing and injuring civilians, including children. "We will keep increasing the international pressure on Russia, strengthen Ukraine's air defences, solidarity with Ukraine." Well, drones killing children, swift condemnation when Russia does it, but radio silence when it's Israel.
Obviously nothing we've ever seen before, right? Look, it should be condemned. I wish that it was condemned in the same way and as quickly in Gaza when it happens. When it happened, the many, many times it has already happened, and when it continues to happen, as it invariably will. But as I say, this should still be condemned. I mean, I think really we are entering an era where attacks on civilians are just now par for the course. International law, which is really very, very clear on the delineation between combatants and civilians, with like extreme responsibility and put on the shoulders of commanders in charge of actions which lead to the targeting of civilians and even that lead to disproportionate accidental civilian death. That just doesn't seem to hold anymore. It just doesn't seem to be the case that international law protects anybody. And that's talking about deaths to civilians. I mean, there's also just terror, right? Apparently, last night in Kyiv, there were more Ukrainians in the underground system seeking protection than there have been at any time before from an attack. That's a to be living in a constant state of vigilance. And I'm not saying that, there haven't been attacks on the other side as well. I mean, there's like generally a view about all parties to any sort of conflict is the idea that civilians are increasingly coming into the scene as I mean, I don't even think people say they're legitimate targets, but just as kind of forgettable targets, which I think is really shocking. Like the treatment of people as NPCs constantly in war, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Sudan. This is a really truly appalling feature of the age that we live in. And of course, this war, which has been going on for 4 years, more than 4 years now, right? So it's as long as the First World War, really, is at this moment shows really no sign of ending, but no sign of anyone actually gaining anything from it anymore, except for the kind of maintenance of a sort of status quo of being in conflict with each other. And the losses have been enormous for both sides. So I was reading this article in The Economist earlier, and the estimate by The Economist is that 1 in 25 of Russian men under 50 have been killed or injured in this war, which is a huge number, and that's also a huge number as a total number. But in Ukraine, proportionally, the number of people killed or injured are greater, equating to 1 in 16 of its pre-war 18 to 49-year-olds. I mean, that's like a huge dent and a huge, massive wave of grief for people who now have lost husbands, fathers, brothers, sons in massive numbers. It's incredible to me that the world isn't making greater efforts to bring this to some kind of end, to kind of stop these extraordinary spiraling losses in this war.
I think if we can say that with a lot of the conflicts, there seems to be no desire for anybody to want to move towards some kind of diplomatic solution. Now, last night's attack on Kyiv is yet another chapter in the story of how modern warfare is increasingly turning to drones as the killing weaponry of choice. Ukraine is fast becoming a world leader in their manufacture, with the European Union having just sent the country 3.9 billion euros to strengthen its drone arsenal. Iran's mastery of drone warfare using its many cheaply produced Shahed drones has meant it's been able to maintain a strategic advantage in the US and Israel's illegal war in the country by applying destructive pressure to the neighbouring Gulf states housing US military bases. And in Britain's defence investment plan, finally unveiled by outgoing Prime Minister Keir Starmer earlier this week, an additional £5 billion was earmarked for a drone transformation in our military, shifting its capacity from more conventional weapons to a large supply of drones. All of this is pretty understandable. The advantage of drones in warfare is that they can be operated remotely from command centres like this one in Ukraine. That means at least some military personnel out of the immediate war zone, which lowers the risk of casualties. At the same time, however, drones extend war zones to far greater areas than using just human soldiers would allow. Drones can pursue enemy soldiers across terrains that would slow down humans normally, gliding through the air in swarms high above forests, swamps, and bombed-out urban landscapes. That means, essentially, that without equally powerful drone detect and destroy systems, nothing but international law protects civilian populations from marauding airborne mechanical killers. And we all know what's happened to international law in recent years, as we've just discussed. Nor has that been more evident than in Gaza, where drone warfare has allowed the Israeli military to use drones, amongst other weapons, to target children wherever they are in its genocidal campaign in the devastated enclave. This is according to a recent UN report. The effects of the possibility of ever-enlarging war zones with killing machines driven by operators far removed from the carnage they're inflicting is evident when you look at soldiers returning from the front line. On the Ukrainian front line, injured soldiers have been evacuated, not by human medics, but by robot rescuers, piloted in drone-dominated kill zones by remote operators. This rescue took 7 attempts before the man was saved. But the constant risk of invisible aerial attack also creates a psychological burden on frontline soldiers, as well as civilians caught up in these ever-expanding war zones. This video from the International Committee of the Red Cross looks at some of the impacts of the increasing nature of drone warfare.
I could hear drones flying, and then the building was hit. I could hear someone scream, "Mom, Mom." I don't know if they were injured or scared.
This is the kind of ever-present threat that sees parents make their children wear their day clothes to bed, never sure if they will need to rush in the middle of the night to seek shelter.
When I hear the sound of air raid siren, I become very tense. I struggle to breathe. In moments like this, you just cannot control your own body.
Ukraine, Sudan, Lebanon, Gaza, Russia, Syria, Yemen. Some of the places where drones are being armed. Small one-way drones can destroy vehicles, ignite fires, and kill people in crowded areas.
Larger tactical drones carry heavier munitions and can strike command posts, bridges, or supply lines. Even unarmed surveillance drones create fear, constant stress, sleep deprivation, or trauma.
In just 5 years, the number of countries using drones has almost tripled, as many believe drones increase accuracy and limit damage. But this isn't the reality we've seen in the last few years. The number of armed groups using this light, relatively cheap tech has skyrocketed, more than a 1,400% increase. FPV drones, where a pilot controls it via live video feed, are widely used to crash into targets. With their cheap analog cameras, it's difficult for a remote controller to be sure of the target, especially at night.
And even more worrying is the use of automated drones that can select and attack targets without human intervention, regardless of whether a weapon operates autonomously or is remote controlled by a distant operator. The military commander is responsible for the effects of the weapon unleashed.
They must apply the law and distinguish fighter from civilian and limit harm.
That discussion of the psychological impact of drones reminded me a lot of Al-Zanana, which is the name that Palestinians give to the buzzing sound that you constantly hear in Gaza because of Israeli drones that surround them. Again, I can't imagine what living around that is like. Now, that massive increase in drone use, not just by conventional militaries, but other armed groups as well, comes down to one singular factor, really. Drones are also incredibly cheap and easy to make. This is from a recent Economist article. Its manufacture uses supply chains much more similar to those which produce consumer electronics than to those which produce tanks or high-end missiles, or, for that matter, artillery shells. This allows rapid evolution through endless innovation and counter-innovation. You update code every few days, says Air Vice Marshal Simon Strasdin, who leads Britain's Integrated Warfare Centre. In 6 weeks, you typically need to do some sort of larger upgrade to your software, and in 6 months, you're probably looking at doing a hardware change as well. New generations of technology can rise and fall without the lines moving more than a few meters. It's partly that reliance on cheap but deadly weapons, ones that can easily move into civilian areas and which also provide plausible deniability to commanders who blur the lines between combatant and non-combatant targets, that's meant a sharp increase in war-related deaths in recent years. According to the Peace Research Institute Oslo, the last 4 years have been globally the most violent since the end of the Cold War. As killing machines get cheaper, it seems lives do also as well. Stephen, now, obviously this is being seen to a great extent in terms of this kind of tit-for-tat drone warfare in Ukraine. But when it comes to Iran, I think, their use of drones and being able to essentially survive the assault by Israel and the United States at a significant financial buffer that Israel and the US do not have because they use more conventional weapons in this war. Is there somewhat of a chance that this gives so much of, I guess, more of a kind of a boon to those who are defending that it might make war less likely because the cost of war is greater? Or is this ever-expanding nature of civilian targets means that it's so cheap to engage in warfare that it makes it more likely?
But actually, I think what you can see is larger military countries like the US or like the UK in the defense budget that was just released the other day, investment plan. There is money to move us towards more drone warfare and away from more conventional, naval approaches or tank building or whatever. So it's the cheapness of drones that's part of the advantage. And you're right, in the case of Iran, what actually gave them the strategic advantage wasn't so much that their drones were especially defensive in dealing with US missiles and US rockets. It was rather they were able to get a strategic advantage by using those drones against their neighbors, that housed US bases and therefore ramp up pressure on the US because you had countries like Qatar and the UAE suddenly having drones going through the windows of their shiny buildings. So it wasn't even that it provided a sort of particularly strong or powerful defense against US attacks. It rather just allowed a kind of fleet strategic advantage that created a political crisis in the middle of that war. But yes, as I say, large conventional armies are increasingly looking at drones as a solution to future warfare. And they do it because, as you said in the piece, it's cheap. It also, the distance, the psychological effect of operators of being somewhere completely remote, it could be even, in Dallas or something, when you're sort of firing drones in the Middle East, being completely remote, very far away from anything that looks like carnage, that looks like killing, that looks like children being blown up, except on something that looks like a video game, creates a lessening of two features of soldiers that have often been very important in order to maintain international law, which is knowledge of the international law, obviously, but then the doubt that comes in, as well as the conscience that comes in. Of course, in history, plenty of soldiers have been without doubt and without conscience, but it's always been the case that someone has to do something that kills somebody else, and that's on them then for the rest of their lives. That is attenuated the further away you get from the battlefield. And I think that's why so many armies, so many military units are, some of them are fueled by pure hate, of course, but so many of them are finding it much, much easier to target civilians because there is that remoteness. They're not having to pull a trigger themselves. They're just having to push a button and look at a sort of infrared screen.
There's been direct testimony from Israeli soldiers about what it's like being in that position and essentially not viewing Palestinians as human. In breaking the silence, I believe, is where all that stuff comes from.
Exactly. And of course, the idea of drones and drone swarms and these sort of killing machines that are very high up in the air, they're not new. Like Obama loved drones. There were plenty of drone attacks throughout his presidency. Britain has never shied away from using them, but they've been expensive and they've been valuable bits of kit. They're no longer that. They're now cheap bits of kit that you can make very quickly. You don't mind losing a few in order to hit your targets, whether they're civilian or not.
And you can easily repurpose existing factories to be able to make them because of the nature of the components.
Exactly. The supply chains are essentially the supply chains of, computers,
consumer
electronics, model airplanes, all those kinds of things. But the other thing is it shows this tendency towards a direction where actually military leaders and in defense strategy, it's really about the removal of humans from the decision-making process at all. So we've seen it, Palantir's COO, whose name I think was Shyam Sankar, I think that was him who said it. I remember playing a video out on this show where he talked about actually Palantir's, the Palantir software, the ability for it to select targets, manifold times faster than a human being, was like getting nuclear weaponry first. It means that you gain a kind of militaristic strategic advantage by being able to completely overwhelm your enemy. And the selection of the targets, whether it goes right, wrong, or whatever, it doesn't seem to matter anymore because, as we said, of this attenuation of international law. And even under the Palantir system, it's at the moment selecting targets, but it's a human operator who has to sort of okay it. But of course, the next move is going to be where there's no human operator okaying anything at all. It goes through a Palantir selection, and then an AI agent of some kind will make the decision about whether or not to fire at that target. So no human will ever have to bear the guilt of having killed anyone, and that will make warfare seamless, guiltless, and increasingly consequenceless.
Now, on this channel, we've reported on many individual instances of Israel committing acts of sexual or gendered violence against Palestinians. But until now, we'd not actually had a full picture of what these acts are when they're perpetrated, and indeed how they are perpetuated as part of Israel's system of occupation. Yesterday, the Palestinian Feminist Collective, supported by Progressive International, released a report outlining Israel's systemic use of sexual and gendered violence against Palestinians. The report, titled A Predatory State, gathered witness testimonies and historical records from the Nakba to present day to present with great detail not just the how, but the why of Israel's historic use of sexual violence. Earlier today, I was joined by a member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, Professor Stephanie Wahab. I started by asking her about the key findings of the report.
The report has a number of findings. The first, which is, I think we would feel like is a really important one, is that sexualized and gendered violence is systematic, meaning that the State of Israel, across numerous institutions and forces, systematically engages sexualized and gendered violence against Palestinians, not just adults, but children as well. They're using a variety of practices and technologies of sexualized violence. also humiliation, sexual humiliation that expresses genocidal intent. The second finding is that sexualized violence, particularly since Israel's accelerated genocide in 2023, has largely targeted men and boys. Women have also, and women and girls have been targeted, but the preponderance of testimonies and accounts that our report has, particularly since the accelerated genocide, has focused on boys and men. And then the third finding is that Israel has really manufactured consent for genocide and for a very long time, not just since October 2023. And one of the mechanisms that they use to manufacture consent for genocide, for sexualized violence, is to rely on, perpetuate racial and colonial stereotypes and tropes of Arab, Palestinian, Muslim men in particular as dangerous and as threats, and consequently security threats. And this is what has in part allowed and facilitated the fabrication of the mass rape allegations of October 7th, but also it helps explain how and why these threats, these accusations, if you will, were so easily accepted and taken up by the Israeli public. And the report, I think, does a very good job at looking at not just sexualized and gendered violence since October 2023, but also in the beginning of the Nakba in 1948, and the ways in which rape threats, rape and sexualized violence was also committed in 1948 and 1967, but the ways in which there's also a support amongst the Israeli public for the raping of Palestinian men, women, and children.
So I want to first ask you about this term used in the report, which is eskat. Can you describe what that is and the role that it plays in the sexual and gendered violence against Palestinians?
Iskat is it's an Arabic term, and loosely translated into English, it refers to taking down, to take down an individual, but to do it through slander, through defamation, through character assassination. Israel has long relied on sexpionage through honey traps, through secret information, through sexualized blackmail. And they do this and have done this to subjugate and degrade Palestinians individually and collectively. And Iskat is really a manipulation of social stigmas that attempt to sow discord within Palestinian families, relationships, communities, social movements. And one of the ways in which they kind of sow this discord is that officers, spies, engage, create these honey traps, the sexual blackmail. They fabricate information. They target particularly queer folks, and they threaten to out them with this secret fabricated information or blackmail. Sometimes it's real information, sometimes it's secret. And the threat is that if you don't comply, and compliance typically means spying on, families, on community members, and essentially feeding the surveillance apparatus of the Israeli state. And I can give you an example if that's helpful. It's actually an example that was covered already, I think, in 2024. by another outlet, but there was a young 20-year-old Palestinian. His name was Adham. He connected with someone on Grindr, which is a dating app, primarily geared towards queer folks. And the two began talking on Grindr, moved the conversation over to WhatsApp. Once in WhatsApp, the person Adham was speaking to shared that they were an Israeli intelligence operative. They bombarded Adham with images and pictures from social media of Adham's family to let him know, we know who your family is. And the officer requested that he give information and intelligence about some of his cousins who were imprisoned and were awaiting a trial. And that if he didn't comply, they were going to out him. And in the end, Adham threw away his SIM card, decided that he wasn't going to comply, and in fact, decided that he'd rather be outed than comply with the IOF and the intelligence officers.
I'm assuming these things mostly are happening to Palestinian men and boys, as you laid out in the first bit of your question.
The escat actually happens to women as well. Like I said, sometimes they fabricate information. Other times, because of the extensive surveillance technologies and apparatus, they can access women's medical records. I'm thinking of an example where the intelligence officers threatened to out an abortion that a woman had to her husband. They threaten, someone has an affair. And again, oftentimes they make up information. And what's, I think, really important to understand about escat and all these various, practices and technologies that they've been using for decades is that the aim is to fracture Palestinian bonds and communities and relationships. And it's a way of really, compromising people. And it's also a way of, smashing resistance.
So your report relies extensively on pretty harrowing reports of sexual violence against Palestinian detainees that are carried out by Israeli soldiers, but are based on first-hand accounts. Some people, of course, have questioned the reliability of that testimony. Or what would you say to them?
I'm really glad you're asking that, because it's first very, very important for anyone reading this report, engaging with its content, to understand and to appreciate that as Palestinians, we have always been deemed unreliable narrators of our conditions, of our history. Edward Said and so many others kind of have spoken to this. So it is a Zionist weapon, if you will, to discredit anything, any kind of oral history, any kind of accounts that Palestinians have to offer. That would be my first response. My second response is that our report is not new. What is different about our report, and what we hope is a contribution and will be helpful, is that we have gathered and analyzed some, I think the total is 11 different reports only from the last 2.5 years. Many of them are reports associated with the United Nations, with human rights organizations, who are also, collecting and detailing testimonies from detainees and prisoners themselves who have experienced sexualized violence, but also witnesses who have witnessed it. So I think it's interesting and really crushing that the burden of proof is continues to be on Palestinians who've been living under occupation, who are facing a state power that explicitly aims to annihilate it. That, it's still up to us, it's still up to Palestinians to kind of like prove that sexualized violence not only is happening, but has been happening since the Nakba, and that this is common accepted practice. And clearly from the report, because of the consistency of testimonies and what people, the brave Palestinians who are coming forward to talk about what happened to them, there's so many consistencies in their stories that it's very clear that this is happening. I'll kind of go back to the initial comment I made just because I think it's worth repeating and really important. I think people really need to understand that there has been such an acceptance and continues to be this acceptance that somehow Palestinians aren't reliable narrators of the things that are happening to us.
I think that dovetails into that very kind of prominent recent case where there was footage of what was alleged to be multiple IDF soldiers raping a Palestinian man in detention. The footage was leaked by somebody. And when you're talking about like the manufactured consent that we saw in Israel for these things happening, the person who ended up getting kind of legal repercussions was the person who leaked the video rather than any people who were on video. I believe they were cleared in Israeli courts by these things. I also want to move on to the concept of reproductive genocide, which also features in your report. And that's something that the South African legal team brought up in the International Court of Justice in 2024. What have your findings been there?
So reproductive genocide refers to Israel's assault on reproductive health and reproductive abilities in Gaza. And what amounts to reproductive genocide, if people are wondering, like, how do we know what this is? It includes the intentional destruction of all medical infrastructure, of NICUs, of sperm banks, of birthing centers. It also includes the denial of food, of water, of medicine, right? Medicine needed in childbirth, medicine needed for creating a child. And these practices, we referred to reproductive genocide because the aim is to preclude Palestinian life and futures. Right? It's not even just about like harming and killing, Palestinians now, but it's about ensuring that the institutions, that the systems and organizations that nurture Palestinian life, right, the very intimate aspects of Palestinian life, the womb and outside of the womb, are targeted to preclude Palestinian futures.
Given this report has been published, what's the kind of response that you want to see from international leaders?
Well, first, we really hope that people are paying attention, that people will choose to read and learn about the content. There's so much information. There's archival information. There is, as I mentioned, this compiling of so many different reports and a particular analysis so that people come to understand just how intentional sexualized and gendered violence is, but the ways in which it is in service of ethnic cleansing and an apartheid. So we hope that international leaders, that human rights organizations, that activists, that people of conscience, right, people who care, like you, will just continue to engage, to raise the alarm, to do what they can to really end the occupation, not just end this period of accelerated genocide.
That was Stephanie Wahab speaking to me earlier today. The man who made Keir Starmer who he is today, whatever that is, disappeared from view for a while. That's after he resigned as the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff over the appointment of Peter Mandelson, self-proclaimed best pal of paedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein, as Britain's actual ambassador to the United States. It wasn't long after that Starmer's tenure as Prime Minister went the way of all things too. But now Morgan McSweeney is back and speaking to the BBC. Appearing on Nick Robinson's Political Thinking podcast, McSweeney gave this diagnosis of where Starmer's Labour went wrong.
It was very hard to get people to focus on what we needed to do to win to begin with. And then once we started getting into 2022, 2023, it was about building the machine. But early in 2024, when we were preparing for the general election, when we were sitting down with Pat McFadden in windowless rooms, hour after hour, planning for day one, I did start to realise that we hadn't done enough to prepare for government. And then we got exposed for that, I think, early. Enough of analysis about how the state worked and how it needed to change.
Now, that's the only video of McSweeney we have in that interview, but there's lots of audio as well, and it's pretty interesting. There's like this bit here, where McSweeney goes on to elaborate on that diagnosis. It turns out the slick team around Starmer might just have been a little bit politically naive.
We didn't prepare enough for what kind of world we were going to be in. We're now in a very different era than when Labour was last in government. And I think we didn't have enough conversations at the top of the party about what that meant, how to prepare for it, what that meant for the state, how the state needed to be reformed, because in lots of ways, the state is really out of shape and is unable to deliver for people. And so people are frustrated. And to understand enough about the mood of the country, because people talk a lot about voters are not patient. It's not patience they lack, it's time. They've waited a very long time to get change. They keep getting promised it, and they haven't seen it being delivered. So you have to deliver quite quickly for people, for them to see the change quickly. And I think we didn't come in with enough of a theory about how we would do that and why that was important.
If only literally anybody had noticed that they were just putting Blairism in the microwave, reheating it and serving it back up to the country without thinking about it. Weird, that. Political naivety is one thing, of course, but others, like Blue Labourite Maurice Glassman, offered a different view of the Starmer government's underpreparedness earlier this year.
This government has no clear vision, and do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the problem. Nobody expected the Conservatives to disintegrate as they did. In 2019...
Right, but I'm asking about your government now.
No, I get it. What I'm saying is, I mean, I was part of that conversation. We thought we had two terms. You know, the first one was to actually get rid of sort of racist and lunatic politicians in the Labour Party, i.e. the Labour leadership at that time. We had to do a lot of work there. And I think the second term was going to be developing policy. It all happened quick. So, yeah, there isn't a clear direction. There isn't a clear strategy. But none of the MPs, none of the candidates challenging Keir have any idea either.
Yeah, when we were in opposition, we didn't spend any time developing policy. All we did was purge the left. Adults in the room, is that you? One thing we've all wondered about Starmer as well is, what exactly did this man ever believe? Well, actually, McSweeney had something to say about that as well.
Did you ever work out what he really believes in? Or is
the country. And I think what really bothered him was what he saw going wrong in the country. Community cohesion, social cohesion breaking apart, public services falling to bits after the Tories, people falling between the cracks, and the country becoming disconnected from the rest of the world. I mean, I think he really was focused on the institutions of the country more than an ideology, and I think he wanted things to be run well, run in the interest of the country, run in the interest of people, and he thought they were broken. He was very driven by wanting to fix government, rebuild trust in public institutions.
Well, that Peter Mandelson appointment did wonders for trust in public institutions, didn't it, Morgan? Well, on that topic, McSweeney had this to say.
If we had known the nature of that relationship, I wouldn't have recommended him. I don't think that Keir would have... I'm certain Keir wouldn't have appointed him. I don't think he'd have got that close. So we didn't know the nature of the relationship. He disputed the nature of that relationship. He described it in a very, very different way than it later emerged. So I don't think anyone, male or female, would have recommended him had that nature of that relationship been known. I also know that when Keir was speaking to people, he was getting a wide range of views. So, and most people at the time, their view was, it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. There's downsides, but on the other hand, he's got some capabilities.
Now, Stephen, on this show, I have multiple times referred to Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer as like Keith Harris and Orville, but it turns out the puppet master didn't have a clue either.
The trouble is, Helena, they were too noble.
Too noble.
They were just too noble. They were thinking about the institutions. They were thinking about repairing government. And of course, they were thinking about the country, which they believe in. They know it exists.
His huge belief
it's
in
real.
the country.
Yeah.
Like, imagine the adults in the room, though, Stephen, right? Not like the student politics of the Corbynistas,
Honestly.
who had whole policy documents ready to hand to the civil service a moment they would take government. No, true adults in the room are spending all your time in opposition, dealing with internal party infighting and purging people because they like Nicola Sturgeon tweets, rather than developing, I don't know, a prospectus for government. And then, of course, the real question here is the mainstream media. Like, people on Twitter picked up on this. We picked up on this. What was Sky News doing when they were questioning the heir apparent to the prime ministership of this country?
Well, nothing. Sitting on their hands and hoping to get as close to him as possible, get as much access as possible. One of the things that McSweeney said there was, we didn't plan enough about how to change society quickly. That's not true at all. They changed society very quickly. As soon as they got in, they were like, you know what, fuel allowance, scrap it. Welfare, let's reform it. Let's cut the health component of universal credit by 50% to people coming onto it after April of this year. Let's try and remove it from young people altogether. Let's try and plunge millions of people into poverty, people with health conditions.
Oh, literally, that was just off the back of Keir Starmer just getting into office and doing this speech where he said things will get worse before they get better.
And they did get worse. But they never got better.
It's like we're going to put them on the broadest shoulders of the sick and the disabled.
Exactly. And then, but other things as well. They very quickly moved to remove jury trials from cases. They very quickly moved to prescribe as a terror group the kind of organisation that Keir Starmer was defending in the 1990s.
And the 2000s.
And in the 2000s. Using arguments of conscience in order to, allow them to make lawful excuse arguments about criminal damage. I can't really think of a government that's done more so quickly to undermine the welfare fabric and the normative judicial fabric of this country than the Labour government, which, by the way, it was only in power. Starmer's Labour government was only in power for 2 years. This is what it managed to do in 2 years. And to hear Morgan McSweeney just be like, oh, my biggest regret is that we didn't give it enough thought. They gave it plenty of thought. They gave it plenty of thought because they came out of the gates with an economic plan which looked like every other kind of trickle-down economic plan we've ever seen in this country, which was massive external investment from corporations in various parts of industry, in the new parts of industry. Some of them were good, like the net zero thing, which also got completely watered down. But they had a view of an economic plan that was never going to change things quickly for the better for people. It was always going to take a really long time.
And there was no narrative as well. Like, they had bought into the narrative of Osborneism. Maybe not in terms of the overall policy, right? Because taxes did go up, although they lied about the necessity of tax rises in the run-up to the election when they refused to answer questions about the conspiracy of silence that the IFS talked about. They were just like, our manifesto has these tax rises. That's all it needs to pay for. And then they get into office and then immediately there's tax rises, right? But the narrative of the previous government fucked everything up, therefore you have to, at home, you watching the telly, have to inflict some pain upon you to fix the problems that the other government caused, as if that would work twice, as if people would fall for the 3-card trick twice.
And what is very mysterious to me, and this is completely baffling, is why is anybody talking to Morgan McSweeney at all? Why is he having a very long interview with Nick Robinson on this podcast when he obviously has zero insights to offer? He's done nothing that should make him an expert in anything, right? Except for winning an election. That's
purging the left. He's an expert at purging the left. And those are the two things they care about. They care about access and they care about the fact that he hates the same people that they hate.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? He's basically, what I can see, he's like the nouveau Mandelson, right? Previously, Mandelson was their access point. Jim Pickard from the FT, who'd done a lot of work on Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, made this point on Sky News, people didn't want to touch him because he's good copy. And they kind of sort of defended him up until the point it was completely defenseless. And they've moved on to the next point of access, Morgan McSweeney, who, photographed speaking with Beth Rigby for briefing in a cafe in London. And then suddenly they want to speak to him about all his insights, when basically his only insight is we didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. So in opposition, we spent all of our time going through people's tweets rather than preparing for office.
But even that doesn't explain why they're speaking to him now, because the left has been purged. So what has he got to offer? The left is all in the Green Party now, which is threatening Labour's flank. So there is another way in which McSweeney has completely failed as a Labour advisor. There is nothing that this man, nothing of wisdom, of experience, of strategic thinking, that he has to offer anybody. We only have to look at the last 2 years. We only have to look at the complete tailspin of the Keir Starmer government, the complete disintegration of whatever reputation he had amongst the centrists for, a noble man of great upstanding character, for all of that to have disappeared over the Mandelson affair primarily, but, also over the country becoming deeply impatient with a failure of his government to deliver for them, things just getting, a cost of living crisis that they really struggle to get under control. Continuing degradation of our high streets, continuing degradation of our society, reform surging in the polls. All of these happened on McSweeney's watch. All of them happened on Starmer's watch. I don't know why he's on podcasts, because he literally has nothing to tell anybody about how to make this country better.
100%. And basically what this comes down to, as far as I can see, is that internally, these people believe that the Tories were the bad guys, Labour are the good guys. We get into office, we'll do what we did in the 90s and the 2000s. Everything will be fine because we are the statespeople that the Tories aren't. They truly had bought into the project that had a finality of just by getting us into office, no matter how many tricks we have to pull to get there, that will be a net positive because we are naturally good at being in office. And we have seen the reality, it's just not true. And they believed in the finality of their project to the point at which they had no heir apparent for Starmer when it all collapsed. And while I'm like, you got what you wanted.
No heir apparent and a completely talentless front bench where Glassman was right in that interview where he said none of those MPs, this was before Burnham that he did that, none of these MPs putting themselves forward as potential challengers are in any position to lead the country. That's a result of a kind of strategy of neutering within the party any kind of Labour values, anything that might be conceived of seen to be even remotely left-wing, so that we just have a parliament flooded with briefcases, a front bench, stacked with idiots who don't have an idea between them on the whole. One or two maybe, but on the whole, a pretty uninspiring government led by Keir Starmer, planned out by Morgan McSweeney, well done Morgan, and supported by a cast of nobodies.
Yeah, absolutely. I said on this show very last week, in no other universe would Peter Kyle be given a position on the front bench. And this is the world we're living in, and it's Morgan McSweeney's that he has shown to have massively failed. Well, fingers crossed the next person who gets into office might have at least some idea of what's going to happen. Now, Pride Month may be over, but there are still plenty of celebrations to come throughout July. Downing Street, however, had their Pride party on Tuesday, where the Prime Minister, at time of recording, boasted about something that makes the UK pretty unique.
Lesbian style icon, I like that. I'm really proud that we've got the gayest parliament. I don't think just of all time, anywhere in the world, I don't think there's any parliament that is gayer than this one. That is fantastic.
It does seem that this might actually be true, with the website LGBT.mp claiming that 75 MPs are part of the community, making up around 11% of the House of Commons. In this same speech, Starmer cited a handful of policy wins the government has delivered for the LGBT community, such as work on HIV/AIDS and on hate crimes. There is, however, one manifesto pledge that the government have claimed to be delivering on that's been subject to a lot of scrutiny in recent days. Last week, Labour's deputy leader posted this. I'm really pleased that a draft bill to ban conversion practices for LGBTQ+ people has been published today. I made sure it was in our first King's speech, and I am glad we're keeping this important commitment to equality and to protect people from abuse. Now, so far, so good. This is one can that's been kicked down the road for almost a decade, having originally been pledged almost 6 prime ministers ago by Theresa May in 2018. It's a draft bill, meaning that it's not going to go to Parliament yet, so there's still time for it to be both improved or indeed frustrated. The government claims the ban is trans-inclusive, which previously proposed Tory legislation was not. The devil is in the detail, however, and the BBC asked infamous Dr. Hilary Cass to comment on what the draft bill might mean for how the NHS treats transgender patients. The government says the draft proposals include exemptions for legitimate healthcare and set a high threshold for criminality, so that only acts that are abusive seeking to change someone's identity will be covered by the law. Dr. Hilary Cass, author of a landmark report into children's gender identity services, said it was important that the legislation allowed healthcare professionals to do their job without fear of litigation. She said, "I am pleased to see that the government is bringing forward legislation which not only gives a clearer definition of what conversion practices are compared to previous drafts, but also what they are not." What this appears to be referring to is a part of the draft bill that states that conduct which is carried out in the course of providing healthcare services is not conversion therapy, which looks suspiciously to me like one huge carve-out for the NHS to do as much conversion therapy as it wants. Given Labour's record on trans healthcare, none of us would be surprised to see such a loophole in the legislation. But it's a little galling to have it promoted to us in a chummy video of Downing Street's Pride Party, whilst at the same time having a current health secretary who won't acknowledge trans women and trans men are men and trans people are their gender, and a former health secretary who met with multiple gender critical groups, including expressing sympathy with the Bayswater support group. Bayswater were found by the Bureau of Investigative Journalists in 2024 to have members who would discuss in a private Discord about a potential abuse they had subjected their trans children to, including destroying their possessions and withholding money until they stopped being trans. Leaks published by Trans Safety Network have even also alleged that one member claimed to want to put chili sauce in their child's mascara. These things are also on top of Labour's continuation of the Tories' puberty blocker ban, their refusal to amend the Equality Act to word it to the nature of trans inclusiveness that was in its intentional nature when it was made in the first place, and their millionth broken manifesto pledge to introduce gender self-ID alongside continually supporting gender-critical chairs of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. For those that would claim that this is just their hand being forced by the Supreme Court ruling, first of all, Parliament is sovereign. They can change the Equality Act if they want. And secondly, they were saying this stuff before the election as well. In the run-up to the 2024 election, Keir Starmer had said trans women shouldn't be allowed in women's spaces, even with a gender recognition certificate, had called for a Section 28-style legislation to prevent schools teaching what he called gender ideology, and Labour delegates to the Council of Europe tried to stop them from condemning the UK's treatment of trans people. That motion at the Council of Europe included us alongside Orban's Hungary and Putin's Russia. On legal gender recognition, the rainbow map puts us on their level too, as one of the most hostile in Europe and the single most hostile in Western Europe. Given this legacy of the Labour government, it seems the height of temerity to boast about how gay Parliament is while being so hostile to certain parts of the LGBT+ community. And for what it's worth, the community isn't buying it either. According to new polling from YouGov, support amongst non-straight people for the Labour Party has plunged by 24 points since the election to only 18%, with Zach Polanski's Green Party in first with a staggering 40%, and they've been unequivocal on trans rights. The LGBTQ community clearly will be convinced by pablum about how gay Parliament is. What we actually want is real policy. Stephen, what did you make of that boppy music and that promotional video alongside the reality of what they've been like in government?
I mean, the music was killing me. The music was the whole thing was too much, but the music just took me out and took me over the edge. What this all shows is that this is a party which is bereft of ideas and has no understanding of the notion of leadership at all. So what you have in the trans case is like this sort of sense that it's sort of hoping that things will kind of sort themselves out and it doesn't have to intervene too much. So it doesn't have to get involved in so-called culture wars, but which are actually wars which affect people's lives. They're at the level of ideology, but they have material effects which are very, very significant. When you see that map of Western Europe, it's completely embarrassing. And by having this position on a very important issue, but treating it as though it's something that the government treating it as though it's something it can stay out of, means that it just concedes so much ground to American interest groups who are pouring money into this country to undermine not only trans rights, but various other kinds of civil liberties, like the right to abortion, for example. And, Keir Starmer has loved standing on stage and talked about like the first duty of government is security. The first duty of government is to, keep us safe. But keeping us safe means keeping out interference, which is not part of our own, our own sort of contract with each other, which is that we are, on the whole, a live and let live sort of country. Increasingly, we're not like that. Increasingly, we're much more concerned with trumped up, and I mean that sort of literally, trumped up battles at the ideological level, which are sort of out winning online rather than thinking about what the actual impacts are on people in their ordinary life. And one side exaggerates the actual impacts on ordinary people in their ordinary lives of having a certain kind of inclusive legislative agenda. And the other side actually has to feel the impacts of those extraordinary of those impacts on their ordinary lives caused by the government just not taking any sort of stand on what kind of country we want to be and how we want to treat one another. And so it's no surprise to me at all that queer people are moving over to the Greens, because it's the one thing that queer people understand, is that actually standing up for each other is really, really important. And when you see a Labour Party that doesn't stand up for one component of your community, while jigging around and being called, I think as he was a lesbian, as Starmer was, a lesbian style icon, and finding it funny and feeling like all good about it. Rather than actually materially standing with people who continue to need protection from bigotry and from homophobia and from transphobia. And I think queer people who are part of a community can see that a government that won't stand up for trans people is also a government that at some point may not stand up for them, and they'd rather be in a party and vote for a party that they know is going to stand up for everybody, which is what the Greens currently represent. And it's, to me, as someone who, really, Labour was my party for a very, very long time, it's tragic to see that it's not a party that would that I could feel like I could belong to, and that you could feel that you could belong to.
Absolutely. I mean, it's certainly one of the many, many, many things that push me away from the Labour Party. And one thing I will say as well is that people talk about identity politics a lot. For some of us, it's survival politics. Obviously, I'm very lucky to be in the position that I'm in, right? But there's a girl who was called Alice Littman, and she was waiting for ages for gender affirming care on the NHS, and she never got it, and she killed herself. And Caroline Littman, her mother, went to meet with Wes Streeting, and Wes Streeting just would not even bother entertaining, as far as I can remember from what Caroline Littman said, the idea of there being enough intervention for kids. He was like, you're too scared about what might happen if things go wrong. And I'm like, well, we know what happens when things go wrong. People don't get the care they need, and then they die. Yeah. And that's the reality. Like, it's survival politics for a lot of us. Now, it's worth pointing out, by the way, that when we looked at the polling there is obviously a lot of younger people are more likely to be LGBT, and the younger population skew significantly more leftwards. But it's part and parcel, really. It's not just Labour wanting to disabuse themselves of the queer community in lots of cases. But there's a lot of the Labour Party's kind of internal discussions about who they want to represent that kind of reviles the fact that they're being represented by young, progressive, metropolitan people with socially liberal values. They view themselves as being historically the party of kind of the post-industrial areas, which aren't really voting Labour much anymore. And so they really have this kind of antagonism to young progressive people, no matter how socialist they may be for what is nominally a democratic socialist party. And they just refuse to admit they need the votes of young people to be able to win. And if they continue along this way, because of how supportive the queer community young people are, that people will continue to flock to the Greens, in my opinion. Yeah, they will. And I will say something on air now about, I've been trying to, people are looking forward to a change with Burnham. And there's this idea that has been floated to me by some around him that they really want to talk to our audience, this audience of people moving towards the Greens, who are Green curious, who want to leave Labour. And I've been trying very hard to make contact, to get someone on to, I've sort of said, we would welcome Burnham on the show. We would welcome an interview with him. If he wants to talk to our audience, he can come on literally at any time, and it has fallen on totally deaf ears, which doesn't really indicate that this idea of going after the sort of voter bloc that you're thinking about, this kind of newer, younger voter bloc, is something that they're really considering, I would say. Well, again, a lot of these politicians, especially in Labour, they're just triangulation machines. As we pointed out with the Keith Harris-Orville comparison between McSweeney and Starmer earlier, they were obsessed with finding the sweet point in terms of what policies poll best, rather than having a belief and sticking to it and selling it to the public. Yeah. They believe that, the fight for trans rights is something worth capitulating on for, the ends justify the means, right? But I have a friend who moved over from America. She fled the Trump administration with their significantly worse crackdown on trans rights over there, and to immediately come to a country that said, well, we don't think you're welcome either, right? And what message are we sending to the world if that's what's happening?
It's such bad politics. Like, people can see through triangulation. They know when they're being taken for fools. They know when they're sort of being offered something in the hope that they'll make up a kind of patchwork which will get this party into a majority. People aren't inspired by it. People are inspired by ideas, and some of those are, if you have bold ideas, good ideas, inclusive ideas, yeah, it's going to piss some people off. You may lose some people, but you will gain many, many more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like, people talked about that. They talk about Jeremy Corbyn specifically. A lot of people, even Farage, said this, right? Like, you may disagree with him, but at least he believes what he believes. At least he's a socialist, right? And when you hear Andy Burnham, West Streeting, James Murray, Keir Starmer, all people who've previously unequivocally said that trans people are their gender they say they are, and who all now say that that's not true, right? Those clips are online. Yeah. Those clips are all found on social media, right? It's just like when Labour Party pick up flags and wave them around at conferences as if people will believe they're not being pandered to. Like, one thing about this government that is kind of universal is they treat the public like idiots. They treat the public like they don't know what they've said before, and that they can just say anything and the public will believe them. And the reality is that people can see through them, and all it will do will lose them votes on both sides, as we have seen from every poll that's happened since the general election.
But let me just say one last thing, which is, Andy Burnham, come on the show, set the record straight, anytime.
Yeah, we are welcome to have you. We promise we won't be too nasty.
We want to hear what your ideas are.
Well, exactly. We'll have robust debate and robust questioning, but at the end of the day, the future of the country is at stake. And whether or not we agree on everything politically, whether we agree on the prospectus for the country, where we want to see everything, at the end of the day, we all have to live here, right?
Exactly.
Just because I don't like the Labour Party now doesn't mean I want the government to fail, because at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones picking up the can if everything does go to shit. So we want to know what you're up to, Andy. We want to know what your plan is, and we want to offer some, polite critique, shall we say?
Yeah, inquiry. Open inquiry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on that bombshell, thank you very much, Stephen, for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Helena.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Dream team on top form as always. And thank you everyone at home for tuning in as well. Make sure that you come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you're watching Novara Media, and good night.